Section 1, Courage is Possible. And Chapter 1, Where to Begin When You're Building Again. God gave you to me, and I want to work on us. Hearing these words for the first time from a hospital bed just after being told that I'd never walk again was the most incredible thing. However, I never imagined hearing I want to work on us with the additional I forgive you after my betrayal and infidelity. Vaughn and I did rebuild our lives again, yes. We managed to stumble forward and ultimately get through it. However, in order to navigate that painful rebuilding process, we had to allow the Lord to move in and work in both our hearts. And we had to apply the grace available to us so we could experience the more that God had always intended for our lives. Yes, it was great. It was so great to hear those words, which now included, I forgive you. And you would think it would have been enough to help me feel loved or give me the courage to be free, right? Unfortunately, it was quite the opposite. I was overwhelmed even more. You see, it was easier for me to walk away than to stay and face my husband. I had been unfaithful. I had lived a secret life of deception and lies. I had hurt myself and those around me. How could Vaughn ever really love and trust me again? Fear, guilt, and shame were the walls of the prison surrounding me and severing any connection to my husband. In my mind, I was not worthy of true love or happiness. I didn't feel very courageous, and I was definitely not free. To give you a vivid picture of where I was and how difficult that season was for me, I'll ask you this. Have you ever watched someone trying to rescue a seal caught in a net? The seal's all tangled up in this net. It wants to be free. It doesn't know that the intent of the rescuer is to free it. The seal fights back, resisting the one trying to rescue it. The net becomes bound, all tightly wound around the seal, and it gets cut in the skin, and it actually starts bleeding. But it continues to resist the one trying to help. The rescuer could even suffer a bite or two from the seal. Well, that was me. I was wounded, hurt, and confused by all the trauma. I didn't know how to get help or understand my real needs. I resisted the people closest to me who were trying to help. I especially resisted Vaughn and hurt him deeply. Yet he saw through my pain and he hung on to me until I was able to see that I was worthy of loving. It was because of Vaughn and those closest to me choosing to fight and not give up on me that I was ultimately able to see that I could be free of these things that had me all tangled up. Don't get me wrong. It was great to receive that love and forgiveness, and I truly wanted to change. But could I change? I didn't even know where to start. If there were road signs on life's journey, I would definitely want you to see a flashing yellow caution light as you take this next step with me. Because just ahead on the pathway is letting go to walk by faith. Letting go is scary because it's terrifying to step into the unknown. I was more acquainted with the pain than with the faith and courage change required of me. And from where I'm sitting, I was actually more comfortable with my pain than the discomfort of change. Loving me without judgment was the only way Vaughn was able to love me where I was. Were there tough conversations? Yes. Were there arguments and hurt feelings? Absolutely. But not once did Vaughn make me feel guilty or call me a bad name in the heat of any of those times. I will always be grateful that God's grace allowed him to embrace me in that process, because then the impossible became possible and we began to see measurable growth. Blockages to rebuilding. When you're rebuilding again, there will be blockages to rebuilding, because whenever we embark upon the path of change, we quickly become very aware that there are blockages within us. We may not be able to accurately name these blockages or know how to remove them at the time, yet they are contributing factors to our lived reality. Since contracting this virus, part of my new normal with my physical disability was that things took so much more time and effort. I was constantly struggling with my level of physical energy and I didn't know why. I was tired all the time and found it really hard to focus. But I thought that maybe it was just a symptom of what I had to live with as a person with a disability. And the inability to focus or comprehend, I thought, well, that's because I wasn't very smart. And I would just have to accept that I couldn't understand like other people. I was living every day feeling like everyone else was better and smarter than me. Talk about having something shoot your confidence or self-esteem. That whole time, I didn't even realize that I had a hypothyroid condition. My doctor explained it to me like this. It's like you have a 4-cylinder engine, but it's only running on one. And that inability for your body to keep up with you is affecting your ability to focus, etc. I was like, yes, that's exactly how I felt. The doctor said that it would take a while for me to feel the effects of the medication that he prescribed, but actually, the results I felt were immediate. For the first time in a long time, I understood what was happening with me, and I knew there was a solution. Emotionally, that lifted something off of me that I couldn't explain. After a few weeks, I regained my ability to focus. That gave me more confidence and I felt more equipped to handle life. I felt like a new woman. While we don't all have known or unknown medical conditions, you may relate to being tired and running on empty. You may experience limited ability to handle stress and conflict to your full capacity. When you are going through life just reacting to the things that life throws at you, you begin to walk around defeated with low confidence. Does that sound familiar? If that's you, I would like to say that seeking medical help for your mental or physical health is vital. My detected mental condition was limiting my ability to see clearly and function or react in a healthy way to the challenges I was facing. I was exerting so much energy, but seeing no results and getting even more frustrated. If I didn't even know there was a problem, how was I going to resolve it? Am I the only one who's been blindsided this way? The most dangerous place in the world is not standing in a minefield. Rather, the most dangerous place in the world is standing in a minefield that you didn't know was there. The same principle is applied to the challenges I needed to make in my broken relationships. You see, no matter how many times I was told I love you or you're forgiven for my mistakes, I didn't even realize that I also had to love and forgive myself. And when you don't realize that you're the problem, that's a problem. And the only way I was able to get back up was with God's help. I had to accept God's love and forgiveness. I had to learn to forgive myself and stop blaming others for my mistakes. That was hard. That was hard. But that was only the beginning of my long road back. Forgiveness is a truly remarkable thing when you experience it. But I had to also believe it, that with God's help, it was possible to become free and stay free. It would be just like what I would continue to experience if I hadn't taken the medication I needed. I would still have been only going through the motions, dragging myself along, and not having the energy to cope with life challenges. As I began to surrender to the Lord, I started experiencing more freedom. I was finally regarding myself worthy of His love. I began to desire more of Him. I needed more of Him. The future of our marriage and our destiny depended on it, filling the void of loss. When you're rebuilding again, before we get to those dynamic steps of surrender, we can continue to learn about building again by reviewing some of the other blockages we discovered and overcame. You see, because there were multiple factors complicating that season of our lives, these losses became challenging blockages. One major factor was the miscarriage we had during the time where we were trying to rebuild our marriage. We will reveal in detail in the next chapter about our losses surrounding the miscarriage and the grace of God to rebuild. But for now, I want to stay on the blockages and things that hold us back. Filling the void of the loss, whenever there is a loss, there is a potential blockage that can come from how we choose to feel the void that is left. Let me explain, because this became the major climate of my betrayal and infidelity. I had this chasm-sized hole in my heart, and I had no idea how I was going to fill it. And that chasm formed what seemed to be an unbridgeable gap between Vaughn and me. Oh, the pain that resulted from that faulty conclusion. When you are in emotional pain, you resort to desperate measures to numb the pain. We both contributed to that drift apart. Vaughn had become immersed in online video games and seemed to be emotionally checked out. I started making bigger compromises. I started lying to Vaughn about where I was and who I was with. Was this the life I really wanted? No. And you might be thinking, well, you chose it. Yes, I did. But I was a very unhappy person, desperately trying to fill that void. Inside, I was drifting away, and Vaughn didn't seem to notice or care. I remember the day I made up my mind to leave Vaughn and move out. I was done. That was my decision, not because I felt that it was the best, but I just knew I wasn't happy. I was desperate for solutions, but had none. I felt trapped and lost. I wasn't that same loving, soft-hearted girl he fell in love with. I was just pretending, and I knew he deserved better. I asked a friend who was also struggling with her relationship if she would get a place with me. When she said, "Sorry, I can't." I spent the next week trying to find a place, an accessible place, that I could afford on my own. And can you believe it? I even asked God to help me find a place. No luck. But in the days that followed, Vaughn and I had the first glimpse of a breakthrough. I confessed everything to him, and I told him about my affair and that our marriage was over, expecting to have him leave. As you would expect, my announcement totally shocked and stunned Vaughn. He left our apartment to stay with his family while he tried to sort through my betrayal. After several days, we got together again and spent hours talking everything out in a neutral place. We agreed poor choices had been made by both of us. He chose to stay and start over again if I was willing to do the same. I didn't understand how this would work, but I was willing to try. I didn't have much hope, but I was willing to be honest. Vaughn hung on to me and fought for me. The very next day after I decided to stay in our marriage, my friend said, "Okay, I'm ready to leave. I'll move in with you." In that moment, I knew God was protecting me when I wasn't able to protect myself. And while I was simply going through the motions to stay, to attempt to work on my marriage, I was at least willing to try. Even in my pain, I started to thank God, while it was only a faint whimper. I was thankful, even though I was almost resenting him for the closed door to leave. Deep down, I knew. Deep down, I knew that it was him. And while I felt alone, I most definitely was not. I need to say here that when God rebuilds, he doesn't do things the way we want or in our time. He does it better. If you are taking notes, or if you want to remember anything I say in Contagious Courage, don't miss this. It's common misconception for people experiencing trauma to block things out. Yes, we block things out. They don't think clearly or are not able to make sound decisions. But until you experience it, you can't truly understand it. So loving them without judgment is huge. I had to lean often on Vaughn's confidence that we could heal and that change was possible. I had even told him at one point that my level of confidence could be compared to my ability to remove the freckles from my arm. Yet I didn't want to live in that kind of fear and failure every day. It seemed like an impossible challenge. Somehow, despite all of my fears, I meant it when I said I'll try. So when I tell you that the process of rebuilding me and my marriage did not happen overnight, I know you believe me. I had to heal before I could have a healthy marriage. Little by little, we discovered and dealt with the unresolved issues that had chipped away at our relationship. Change breaks the chains. We made some big changes. I quit my job and distanced myself from my old lifestyle and influences. We rebuilt our social environment and reprioritized our lives and goals. And we implemented practical ways to build trust and mutual accountability. One of the biggest practical and most powerful things we did to rebuild was having full access to each other's emails, passwords, and social media accounts. I can almost hear the gasp as you read that. I recall the response I received when I asked this question at a couples retreat. I said, I wonder if I were to ask you to give your phones to your spouses or significant others right now without erasing any history, would you be willing? And if you did, what would they find? Well, you could have heard a pin drop. Maybe you think that is excessive. Whether you're married or not, let me ask you this. Are there secret things that you're afraid to share that are affecting your ability to have a deeper relationship with God or those close to you? In your rebuilding, another important step was to have a fresh start. That's when we decided to pack up and move to Edmonton. When all we had was each other, we were truly able to start rebuilding again. I can be honest here and tell you that I hadn't fallen back in love with Vaughn yet. Some days I felt he was breathing for both of us, and that was enough to keep us alive. For way too long, I wondered if I would ever even be happy again, let alone be free and have courage. After what we had just been through, I didn't think it was possible. But we were still together, and that was something. You may have heard me say my story is about so much more than how he stayed. By now, I'm sure you're catching a glimpse of that truth. Another important element in the rebuilding process was the power of praying parents. Talk about someone not giving up on you when you didn't want help. There wasn't one phone call that didn't end with, I love you and we are praying for you. I know my mom could write her own book. But let's just say that sometimes those phrases would literally cause me to get angry and at times even hang up on them, even though those prayers may very well have been what saved my life. For that, I am so grateful. I can't thank them enough for praying through to completion. Looking back now, I realize that in order to slay the giants of fear and intimidation and find the courage to walk in freedom, that first step towards healing was to receive love even when I didn't feel worthy. I want to celebrate this again. It was Vaughn's love and the love of those closest to me that helped me understand and truly feel God's unconditional love. Vaughn was willing to love me where I was at, just like God was willing to love me where I was at. That unconditional love began to dissolve any notion that I wasn't good enough to be loved. Trusting the builder. I couldn't see how this was possible, but I had to rely on God's strength and learn to trust again. However, how can we love if we don't trust the person we are following? Good question. That is what made those initial steps so terrifying yet so important if we were going to rebuild. Yes, I was forgiven, but I had not yet learned to completely let go and trust. But I was willing to try. I had to fall in love with both God and Vaughn all over again. I had to trust that he would never let me down, even though for the longest time I believe they both had. Looking back now, I understand that each lie I had believed over the years about myself and God led me to lower my shield of faith. Those lies were like arrows on my heart and became the unknown blockages that started to redefine my view of God. That's when I began losing my trust in God and making those little compromises. I really don't believe people realize just how harmful these little compromises are. Kay Arthur said, "Sin takes you farther than you ever expect to go, keeps you longer than you ever intended to stay, and costs more than you ever expected to pay." Infidelity, a high price indeed. Eventually, I lost my personal relationship with God. As a result, I lost my ability to discern His voice or trust the God I had always loved. I had known the freedom of simple childlike faith. In that kind of faith, I knew that God loved me. And if I made a mistake, I would ask forgiveness and He would forgive me. There was no shame attached to that. And spoiler alert, God had used Vaughn to be the true example of that unconditional love that I had craved. You'll often hear me say that Vaughn was Jesus with skin on. However, let me just say that while God will use people to be His hands and feet, no one can feel the longing of your heart except Him. Sometimes we make bad choices in our pain, and those bad choices often lead us down a path we feel we can't come back from. Though that may be true, I have also learned the flip side of that. Each choice I made in obedience to God took me one step closer to my freedom. Through this painful process, the Lord was faithful to weave love, joy, peace, and courage into this warrior's heart. No matter where I am in my journey, there are 3 things that help me maintain my freedom and courage. These 3 are essential: being obedient to His voice, getting really good at waiting or faith, and the discipline to keep in step with the Lord. Where are you in your journey? Are you feeling overwhelmed today? Maybe you are trapped in a situation that's causing you to lose hope. Maybe trapped in a secret addiction that you can't find your way out of. Maybe you are consumed with shame or guilt and you wonder if anyone can truly love you. I challenge you to be transparent. Give up control. Let someone love you in your brokenness. But more than that, learn to love yourself. Perhaps letting God love you right where you are is the first big step for you. Maybe you're not ready yet, and that's okay. He's a gentleman and he will wait with you and for you. If you're reading this and you have healthy relationships, or you just want to go farther and have even more freedom, I'll have more for you later, but I will ask you this. Is there someone close to you who needs you to love them where they are, without judgment? As I reflect on Vaughn and me, as the couple who almost didn't make it, I can honestly say that if sharing our story helps just one person find the courage to get up and rebuild again, it's all worth it. With confidence, I can declare this scripture to be true in my life in ways I never had before. My grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me.